This week on the Wheelhouse. Affirmative action, college admissions, and federal funding. For Connecticut Public, I'm Frankie Graziano. This is the Wheelhouse, the show that connects politics to the people. We got your weekly dose of politics in Connecticut and beyond right here. And right now, we're going to show you some reaction to what it's like to get into that Ivy League school of your dreams. There's a prayer right there and a realization. Oh, this is Christina Lee, and she's just gotten into Yale. And you hear that song dedicated to Eli Yale, of course. Mom, she got in! Christine Lee, 2018 reaction video, a noisy celebration, racked up over 1 million views on YouTube. Since 2018, there's been a lot of shakeups in higher education, including a 2023 Supreme Court decision that banned race-conscious admissions. Last year, we also saw multiple universities like Columbia and Northwestern settle with the Trump administration for millions of dollars amid accusations of anti-Semitism, or at least that's what was lobbed at them. This hour, we're talking about the impacts of federal policy and politics on students and the world of higher ed. With us to do it today, Michael Roth, the president of Wesleyan University. Michael, thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure. Glad to be with you.
So glad to have you here, President Roth, and also joining me in the studio, a good friend of mine to my right, Bilal Sekou, Hillier College Associate Professor of Politics and Government at the University of Hartford.
Good morning, Frankie, and go Hawks.
Go Hawks. I'm glad to see you this morning. This is going to be a good conversation for us to have. Folks, how's it going on your college campus? What about the culture there? Is it an inclusive college campus? You tell us. Hit us up on our YouTube stream or give us a call, 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. President Roth, I'm going all the way back to the 60s here. Let's go back to 1961. That's when President John F. Kennedy used affirmative action for the first formal time in an executive order to prohibit federal contractors from discriminating based on race. In 1964, the Civil Rights Act prohibited employment discrimination based on race. This applied to colleges and universities. Tell us more, in your view, why this is so important, this happening back in the 60s.
Well, I think those executive orders or other kinds of administrative actions were taken to prevent what was pervasive discrimination in academia and the workplace against Black people and against people of color more generally. And those actions were really aimed to set a level playing field so that companies could be penalized if they were found to actively discriminate against Black applicants or people who applied for jobs who were coming from minority groups of various kinds. But really, the biggest issue were for African Americans. And that's different from affirmative action, which institutes a policy to actively seek out people who have been from groups that have been previously discriminated against. And what I just said, you can hear in my hesitation, I started to say people who had been previously discriminated against, and there's the rub, because the people you actively help may not have themselves suffered discrimination, but they belong to groups that have historically been discriminated against. And affirmative action in education and in the business world, and in entertainment, other places, was meant to counteract the pervasive effects of racial discrimination by actively finding people to admit or to contract with from historically underrepresented and historically discriminated against groups. And I think it had a very powerful effect on some institutions, although it doesn't take too long to see that its effects were kind of small But the backlash against it was large because white applicants who said, "Hey, I didn't discriminate against anybody. I'm 18 years old. I'm just a white working class person who's applying to college or to law school. Why should I not have the same advantage as a person from a historically discriminated against group? I myself," that person might say, "never discriminated against anybody." And the answer was, well, you live in a country where there's been pervasive racist discrimination, and the policy of the country and its institutions should be to counteract that with purposeful action, not just having a level playing field. And now, of course, we've had a backlash against that. And the only discrimination the federal government these days seems to worry about is discrimination against white people.
There have been, I appreciate that nuance and that distinction that you made there, President Roth. And I want to talk specifically about affirmative action, Bilal. Been a lot of Supreme Court cases around that. There was a 1978 case about the quota system at the University of California, Davis. In 2003, there were suits against the University of Michigan. And in 2023, the Supreme Court invalidated admissions programs. That's why we're doing the show today at Harvard University and the University of North Carolina, effectively banning race-conscious admissions there. A little nuance there in terms of how it connects to affirmative action. But can you walk us through some of these arguments that are being made in court?
Just a little nuance to what President Roth said a bit earlier. I think this is also important. I don't think people really recognize today the extent to which institutions of higher ed, employment opportunities were closed off to Black people and other people of color. But not just people of color, but also women, right? And religious minorities. And so the impact of the Civil Rights Act, which, along with the Voting Rights Act, I count as two of the most important pieces of legislation passed by Congress in terms of fundamentally and radically transforming our country, can't be underestimated. I think of myself as someone who really stands on the shoulders of the people who fought to open up opportunity in this society. And the one nuance I would offer about what President Roth said earlier is that even high-achieving Black and Latino students and other students of color were being denied access and opportunity in higher ed. High-achieving, skilled workers were being denied access and opportunity, especially in the trades and other areas of employment, which had a very detrimental impact on the opportunities for Blacks and others to succeed in this society. And so these kinds of programs expanded opportunity greatly. The attack on affirmative action that the court a couple of years ago affirmed had been something that had been going on for decades. It wasn't something that just started most recently. The resistance to the efforts to really, I think, restructure this racial hierarchy that existed in our society is what these programs were really about, and what they, I think, were quite helpful with doing. Did they succeed as far as they needed to? No. But the opposition to those programs from the very start was there, and it was very strong. What's amazing about even one of the first sort of real, one of the first Supreme Court decisions on this, the Bakke decision itself, what people don't realize is that the white student who was denied access, actually there were other whites who were accepted ahead of him who didn't even have the same, who didn't have the grade point average and some of the other things that we consider important for admission. And so this idea that these programs have somehow benefited people who are unqualified, who really don't have the skills or the abilities to be in higher ed is just nonsense. But they resonated with a lot of people in our society. And I think that's where we're at right now with even the attacks on DEI.
You mentioned women, too. Right. And then there's also people of different genders, people identified by different genders that are experiencing this kind of sexism right now. And it's happening at the federal level, too, around competition, college-based competition, things like that as well.
Yeah, I mean, the success of these programs over the years is that they increased access and opportunity. Even someone like me, and I love that opening sort of video you showed, My mother was the one who did the screaming because she was getting me out of the house. But at the same time, I mean, these programs have really dramatically expanded opportunity, not just for people of color, but also for women. In fact, the greatest beneficiary of affirmative action programs have not been people of color. They've actually been women.
Michael, what policies
and white women in particular.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Michael, tell us what policies you have in place at Wesleyan to ensure a diverse student body.
Well, we, like most colleges and universities that are selective.
Sorry. Let me jump in here. I made a mistake in the way that I asked you that. I still want to talk about pre-2023 here because I want to help people understand how we're sort of reacting to the news. Before, in the last few years, before you made any kind of policy changes in the last few years, what did you have in place before the Supreme Court decision comes down?
Well, we've always had what we call a holistic admissions practice. That is, we try to understand the students as best we can as whole people and not just as test takers or grade getters or people who happen to have certain advantages that give them a leg up in the competition to get into colleges and universities. And so we wanted to have a diverse student body, which meant for us, more or less the same number of men and women. I think I have a little bit of a difference about the affirmative action and women because it's harder for women to get into highly selective colleges and universities than for men because the women are, as a rule, better prepared academically. We wanted to have a campus and where there was rough parity with men and women and people now, of course, non-binary students are part of that mix and people from different racial and ethnic groups. But we didn't have quotas. We didn't have boxes that you checked and we said, okay, we have X number of Latinos or X number of white students, et cetera. But we're very conscious of trying to have a diverse student body. Wesleyan very actively sought out Black students in the early 70s and late 60s, and kind of famously so, because the result wasn't as kumbaya as I think the administrators at the time thought. They said, they went out and sought applicants, people who didn't seek Wesleyan. Well, we found Black applicants in different cities in the Northeast. And when they came to Wesleyan, they said, oh, great. It's not really a wonderful place for us here. It's still a historically white institution with all the prejudices that are involved in that. And so the institution had to adjust in the late 60s and early 70s as it wasn't just a place for white men and white Christian men, really, because there were very few Jews allowed in too until the early to mid 60s. And so those changes happened over time, and in anticipation of the Supreme Court decision, which we were not surprised went against the policies of affirmative action, we were looking at other mechanisms not to achieve racial diversity, which is now illegal in the United States, but to have the broad notion of a diverse student body that we think facilitates learning. I mean, we're pretty clear. I think everybody recognizes that if you're in a room with everybody who thinks like you or has the same background you have, you're going to learn less than if you're in a room with people who have lots of different ideas and come from different life experiences. And so we did have to adjust. We don't know the race of the applicants until after we've closed the class, after we're done with admissions. But we do seek out students from not just, let's say, the Northeast or the West Coast cities where we have lots of people, but we seek students from all over the country who can add to the learning community we have, because we believe that of all our students learn more when they are in the company of people who have different life experiences and different points of view.
I'm going to say this without it sounding like I'm casting judgment on any universities or anybody that's having to do this work, but Bilal, I want you to help me kind of parse this through, because you have to do this at the University of Hartford too, whenever you're involved in any kind of departmental decisions. But it sounds like a lot of work to have to do now to try to make sure that you are having what President Roth is talking about with diverse ideas and experiences happening in your student body.
Yeah, I'm really amazed at the way in which the admissions office tries to navigate all of this. The one thing I will add about, the description that President Roth just provided is that, for me in the classroom, I've watched the University of Hartford really transform. When I got there over 20 years ago, we were probably at about 18, 19% students of color. Now we're about 40% students of color. And one of the things that I really appreciate about the diversity of the classroom and all of the things that the president has suggested about the range of views, the range of experiences that students bring, but it's also something that the students themselves value as well. And so when I'm having discussions with my students, they have an appreciation for the fact that they are in a room with people who are racially, ethnically different from them, who don't share their own religious views or perspectives. Some of them are on the right, some of them are on the left, but I try to create that space where we can all engage because this is a pluralistic society. And they recognize more than some of the people who have attacked these efforts to diversify our institutions. They recognize more than those policymakers do that this has value and that this is important and that this is the way in which we build an inclusive democracy, and I think they clearly recognize that.
Let's save that for later because I want to keep talking about kind of what's happening now and how the reactions are going to come in after what's happening in 2023 and these great conversations you are having in the classroom. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson says in 2023, in a dissenting opinion of the UNC case, but deeming race irrelevant in law does not make it so in life.
Absolutely. Often I talk to my students about how biological race and the social construction of race are two different things, right? Unfortunately, many of us believe that biological race is real when it actually isn't, but the social construction of race is real, and it has consequences for life chances and life opportunities, right? And so when we look at the impact of this, and I know we're going to probably get to a more detailed discussion about this, but one of the things we clearly recognize is that the impact of this, especially at some of the more elite institutions, the ones that really have, it's more difficult to get into, that they actually reject a high percentage of students, which my understanding is roughly the average is about 70%, 60% of students are accepted to most institutions. That's sort of the average acceptance rate. But at these elite institutions, right, that accepted rate is much lower. And what's happened in the aftermath of this decision is that the number of students of color are actually declining at some of the most elite institutions and the most difficult ones to get in. And it also is having an impact on the diversity of the student population on those campuses, and Black students in particular are being impacted by that. And at the end of the day, what that means also is that access to opportunities, especially some of the most prestigious, some of the most influential jobs in our society, are being restricted to or being limited to mostly whites, for example. And I think that's very intentional in terms of what this project is ultimately about.
Fascinating viewpoint there, and I'd like to share another fascinating viewpoint that sort of looked into the future, and I'm going to share this with Michael Roth. Going back to 2003 in the case of Barbara Gruder against the University of Michigan Law School, former Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor wrote in the opinion, "We expect that 25 years from now," this is in 2003, so she's talking about 2028, "the use of racial preferences will no longer be necessary." We're in 2026, 2 years away from that predicted sort of progress line from the late justice. Where do we stand now?
Well, it seems clear to me that the forces of racism are still very intense in this country, and in fact, they've been liberated by the current administration to be expressed more publicly. I think there is a debate among, I think, reasonable people about whether you should think about admissions at the level of the individual or at the level of the classroom or of society more generally. So let's take admissions of men and women. As I said before, it's harder for a woman to get into an elite school than for a man. And if for the individual girls applying, from high school, it's just not fair. Buddy gets in, he's getting B pluses and I'm getting A's, and he's going to get into Wesleyan because they need boys. And it's not fair to me as an individual. And I sympathize with that. I think that if you think about it at the level of the individual, she passed him. Like if there's a race, she came in ahead of him. But admissions in colleges and university isn't just a race where you give out a prize. You're actually trying to construct a learning environment where people benefit from the presence of others who have different experiences, different points of view, different priorities. And so if you look at it that way, you want to create opportunities for groups. You want to create opportunities for learning in different classrooms and residential campuses. You want to have a residential experience that complements the classroom experience. All those things are not about who won the race, who got the highest grade, or who got the highest SAT score. It's much more nuanced than that. And so right now in our country, it's very clear that anti-Black racism and racism against other groups, people of color, is still very strong. And so I wish that we had the legal right as colleges and universities to construct our classes with that in mind, with the notion that, a white kid just has an easier road ahead of him most of the time than most Black applicants. Some people will say, yes, but you are giving affirmative action preferences to the Black son of a doctor and a lawyer who went to private school in New York because they were Black. That seems unfair. It does seem unfair at the level of the individual. And so I understand that argument. But I think the current regime is so concerned about anti-white racism because the current regime does not like a world in which diversity is given a very high priority or is given a strong value. The current regime really wants to see white people rule, not because they're the most qualified, but because they're white.
and President Roth, let's look at the racial makeup here. I think it was the New York Times recently reporting an 8% increase of underrepresented minority groups at public flagship universities in 2024. The same analysis shows a large decrease in enrollment of Black and Latino freshmen at some of the nation's top private institutions. What does that say to you?
Well, I think at some of the large and the flagship universities are great, and in some ways you may get a better education with people who are working hard in Austin or in Champaign-Urbana or in wherever the flagship is at Berkeley than you will going to an Ivy League school where nobody goes to class and everybody gets an A. So the flagships are really great. They're great institutions. I think what's happening are some of the students who might have gotten into Yale or Harvard in the past are not getting in, and so their next choice is still a great choice to go to, let's say, Berkeley or UConn or Wesleyan, and they're taking that choice. And I think that can happen also because in some states, they take a percentage of the high school graduates who have the highest scores, let's say, and that will include the top echelon in a mostly Black high school or mostly Hispanic high school, and that creates the diversity at a flagship that you might not see at an Ivy League school. A lot of the schools, and Wesleyan is like this too, we have doubled down on socioeconomic diversity. Not because it's a proxy for race, because that's illegal, and I don't think any of us want to be doing something illegal, but we do want to offer opportunity to people who don't have those opportunities handed to them by their family and the wealth the family has. And so what you've seen in many colleges and universities that historically have not had a lot of Pell-eligible students, that is low-income students, that they have a higher and higher percentage of Pell-eligible students. You see this at elite schools like Princeton or Yale, and at some liberal arts colleges. And I think that's a good thing for the country. It's not the same as anti-racist practices, but it is certainly a salutary effort to create opportunity for people who are denied opportunity otherwise.
From Connecticut Public Radio, this is the Wheelhouse. I'm Frankie Graziano. You've been listening to Michael Roth, president of Wesleyan University, and Bilal Sekou, professor at the University of Hartford. They're not going anywhere. They're going to stick with us. After the break, we're going to talk about how higher education has responded after the Supreme Court ended affirmative action. Are you concerned about higher education now? Give us a call, 888-720-9677. This is the Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. Earlier, we talked about how college admissions and student bodies have changed since the 2023 Supreme Court decision struck down affirmative action. Now we're looking at how higher education has reacted and implications for students in Connecticut and beyond. Back with us, Michael Roth, president of Wesleyan University, and Bilal Sekou, associate professor of politics and government at the University of Hartford. Thank you both for sticking with us. Bilal, we just heard from President Roth. We were talking about how Wesleyan is sort of reacting to what's happening at the Supreme Court level. What say you?
Yeah, and I just wanted to add sort of a nuance to what President Roth said about this sort of pivot away from any kind of racial preference to a class-based preference. And I think he's absolutely right that it's an imperfect shift in terms of creating the kind of diversity. But the other thing that's really interesting when you sort of dig into the data, and I think ultimately as we explore or at least try to understand more what has happened in these years and these last few years and going into the future, it'll be interesting to see, because one of the shifts that has occurred, and President Roth is absolutely right, a lot of these sort of high-performing students of color are no longer even applying to some of these more prestigious universities. And they are, in fact, shifting away and moving into really good institutions. And again, I think he's right about the flagships are not bad choices. But what's interesting is that we also know in our society what that also means is that those, elite institutions are also pathways to great jobs in government, great jobs in businesses. And so when we look, I think, into the near future, it also may mean that corporate boards, government jobs and institutions will also see a real shift, and that they will become even more wider and less diverse in those areas, which will have impact on all of our lives. And so I think this is why this battle is a battle worth fighting, because I think this is really key to transforming the society in the way it needs to be transformed into a much more inclusive democracy.
I wanted to react kind of slowly to that because I think that's really important to sort of underscore that you shared that perspective, because it seems like, at least at what President Roth is saying, that this is something that's very intentional, at least from the administration and the federal government right now. And, of course, from the Supreme Court of the United States. Michael, I want to ask you a question here. One way, well, first, let me actually invite people to join the conversation with us. We're having a great conversation today. Folks can hit us up on our YouTube stream, or they can give us a call, 888-720-9677. Ask the University of President question here. Ask Bilal Sekou a question here as well, or even me. One way it seems...
Frankie, may I just jump in for real
go
quick?
ahead. Yeah, you got it.
One of the things that I felt in reading the Supreme Court decision when it came out, and it wasn't a surprise. I mean, the court had tipped its hand before, and I'm not a lawyer, I don't read a lot of decisions, but I read this decision, and what I took away just as a citizen, as a reader of this, was that they said you can't give somebody a preference because of the group they belong to, because that's an unearned preference. Like if I hang out with a lot of guys who play basketball really well, they're not going to give me a basketball scholarship because I hang out with them. I'm in the same group. Let's say we go to the movie together. It's only the individual who should get the benefit. So I read this decision. So you shouldn't get a benefit because of the group to which you belong. Now, all these very highly selective colleges, universities, all the Ivy League schools, they practice legacy admissions. By definition, you let somebody in because of their parents or their grandparents. And Wesleyan was like this too. We had a small group, maybe 8%, but we did tip a few people in every year because their parents went or their grandparents went. And so I read the Supreme Court decision, and I wrote to my alumni director and my admissions director and said, how could we, in good conscience, keep legacy admissions, which by definition is like you get benefit because of the group you're in, not because it was something you did. Like your father played football, so you get in even though you don't play ball. That's crazy. So we did away with legacy admissions that month, and I thought wrongly that all the Ivy League schools would have to do this because it's so obviously hypocritical. On the one hand, say, well, we have to treat everybody as individuals, except the people we have in our club. And at some of these schools, it's 20%. It's more than that. And they have not changed. We have changed. And of course, my alumni weren't altogether happy, but I think they saw that it was more fair given what we have to do in other dimensions.
I just want to talk to you quickly about this, though, Michael. When you're doing this and you're looking at the calculus, did you guys have a number in mind of how many kids were actually benefiting from legacy admissions, or the percentage you knew about at a different school? Did you know how many at Wesleyan?
Yeah, it was about 8% at Wesleyan.
8%,
it was.
Okay.
And and at Wesleyan, it was always weird because what happened would be I'd be like somebody's kid would apply and they didn't get in. And the letter would say something like, even though we tried to help you out, your kid wasn't smart enough to get in. So it was like a double insult. So they would call me and say, So in a way, I was glad to be done with it. But it's also so obviously unfair. And people say to me, well, there are a lot of unfair things in life, and it's okay, it's loyalty. But the idea that at Harvard or at I don't know, Yale, where they take like less than 5% of the people who apply,
right,
that they have to tip relatives. I mean, it's unconscionable. We don't know now who's related to a Wesleyan person when they apply, just like we don't know their race. And I think we're down to about 5% instead of 8% or 6%.
Real quickly, frankly. So one of the things I do in my class, I have this discussion about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I talk to students about how universities have routinely accepted athletes who don't meet the qualifications for admittance to a university, legacies, as President Roth has said, but also the children of major donors and contributors will get some preference sometime. And finally, the children of faculty and staff, right? And the one that the students reject the most are the legacies. But then I have a discussion about, okay, here are some objective criteria, the meritocracy, the idea that these are the things that people who get into universities should get into, and talk about things like grades, classes you've taken, letters of recommendation, the essay you write for the institution, your prior internships or other experience, and this long list of quote unquote objective criteria. And what the students quickly recognize is that they're really not objective, that they are class biased themselves. And so, as President Roth has suggested, this is just not easy, doing what universities pride themselves on doing, which is creating institutions in which not all of the kids come from the same class background, not all of the kids. And so for me, at least, this fight over the use of things like race is not a fight that should be abandoned. And because I think if we're going to really make the kind and continue the kind of transformation that made it possible for someone like me, who grew up in a welfare-dependent, single-parent household, to attend a university, I know that what the 64 and 65 acts that were passed by Congress did was they helped to change the society, that a person like me could find access and opportunity in an institution of higher education.
You said earlier class-based enrollment. It sounds like there's some sort of economic, I don't know if affirmative action is the word, but there's some sort of conscious now towards economics in terms of admissions now to try to make sure that you have some kind of diversity in the student body. So what does that entail? Are people offering free room and board? Or is there maybe a threshold to which people could qualify? Tell us what the universities are doing.
President Roth can speak in more detail about this, but for example, looking at one's socioeconomic background as a sort of way of thinking about granting opportunity to attend a university. And there are other indicators, other measures you can look at. But ultimately, the issue of race, though, is one that is a deeply troubling problem in our society, that even class-based solutions will not generate the kind of outcomes that will create the kind of diversity we need to see at our institutions. And we're not even having a conversation about the faculty at these institutions as well, or the curriculum at these institutions when we get these students there, which often lag far behind what our student populations look like.
AP has colleges enrolling record numbers of low-income students. They're also finding that economic diversity has increased. Universities still saw decreases in the enrollment of black students. Let's get you into the conversation here with all I'm saying, President Roth, and what Bilal just mentioned, and now those stats we're getting from the Associated Press. What's the situation like?
Well, Bilal is, I think, completely right about it. It's not a substitute for race-based affirmative action, uh, but race-based affirmative action is illegal. And so that's the law of the land right now. But I think it's a mistake. But the elections have consequences, and one of the consequences is the Supreme Court justices are appointed by the president. And I think that I applaud the socioeconomic diversity that and the gains in that area that have been made. I think it's really important, and because colleges and universities are highly selective when they use the criteria I was just talking about. I mean, they correlate very heavily with wealth, and so trying to figure out how students make the best use of the resources available to them as an indicator of how they'll do in college. That's our job. The guy who runs admissions at Wesleyan, he was on a full ride as a student here when he was a kid, and he has a deep sympathy and interest in giving opportunities to people who have been deprived of those economic opportunities and other opportunities as young people. My head of fundraising and alumni relations is an immigrant from Haiti who also had his life changed by getting a free ride to Wesleyan when he was a young person. So I think having people in positions of power like that who have a commitment to diversity within the law, but a commitment to diversity to provide opportunities for people who might otherwise not have them. Get a rich kid who has everything in front of them and they use some of the stuff in front of them, that's nice. But if you get a kid who goes to a high school that's really challenged, where they don't have a lot of opportunities and they seek those out, they make the most of them. They may not have the same scores as another person, but they've shown more potential than a person who was, say, born on third base and think they hit a triple. So we look for those folks who, and we work with organizations like QuestBridge that really find folks in rural America and sometimes in cities who have just not had the opportunities to thrive. And we take bets on them. And most of the time, they do very well here.
Staying with the idea of economic diversity, some schools like MIT, Princeton, now actually offering free tuition, or at least that's what they're saying. In January, Yale announced it'll allow kids to go for free if a student comes from a household that makes under $200,000 in that 2026-27 academic year. What are you doing at Wesleyan? What are some ways that you could sort of tackle this issue?
Well, I asked my folks, can we have a slogan like that? If you make less than X, it's free. And it's the fine print is so important on these things, because if you make less than $100,000 at Wesleyan, it's probably going to be free, room and board and tuition. And we don't have any loans. We don't put any loans in anybody's packages. And we meet the financial need of anyone we accept. So if you're accepted to Wesleyan and we think you can't afford to pay tuition based on a formula that is shared with lots of schools, you don't pay tuition, you don't pay room and board. And so the wealthiest universities have made these announcements. I think they're great. It's a great announcement. We don't know exactly how many people that applies to, because the most selective schools are overpopulated with the richest Americans. So you could say it's free for those two people who make less than $200,000. But I exaggerate. It's not that bad. I mean, they places like Yale and even Princeton, which is notoriously tilted to the wealthy for a long time, they've really made an effort to say we're increasing the numbers of low-income students, and not just increasing the numbers, but giving those people support. Because there's a lot of research on how schools like, we admitted these low-income kids, and then they don't support the ones that are there. And they're not used to the environment in the same way that a guy from a prep school would be used to it. So you also have to not just make it free, but provide the level of support to create what we started talking about in the beginning, an inclusive community where everybody feels they belong, whatever their economic background, whatever their racial background, whatever their religious preferences, that they feel they belong to a community in which they can learn.
About 10 minutes left in the conversation. I'm going to go to a quick break, and I'm going to invite folks to give us a call after the break, as we are running out of time here today. 888-720-9677 is the number. 888-720-9677. Michael Roth and Bilal Sekou will be back for one more segment after these words. This is the Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. College campuses are historically an arena for political debate and protests. Since President Donald Trump was reelected to the White House, though, threats of funding pulls have been lobbed at university presidents over anti-Israel protests. Students are also contending with the prospect of federal law enforcement showing up on campus. To help us understand how school administrators and students are coping at this time, Michael Roth, the president of Wesleyan University, and Bilal Sekou, associate professor of politics and government at the University of Hartford, Columbia University, and the Trump administration. Michael reached a deal last year that restored federal funding and research grant money to the university. A big payout, $200 million to the federal government over 3 years, and an additional $21 million to resolve alleged civil rights violations against Jewish employees. You have been particularly outspoken on this settlement, saying in July of last year on PBS, the White House has determined how students should be disciplined at a private university. This is massive overreach. Why is it a massive overreach in your thought?
Well, typically, when there's a accusation of a civil rights violation, whether Title VI or Title IX, there's an investigation, there's a finding of fact, and then there are meetings between the institution and the government to determine what would be appropriate remedies. And the Trump administration has done none of that stuff. It just went in with a big stick, hundreds of millions of dollars. I think UC system, it's $1 billion, and I think now Harvard, it's $1 billion they're threatening them with. And the idea that they're protecting Jewish students is ludicrous to me. I mean, I'm the first Jewish president of Wesleyan. We have active pro-Palestinian protests on campus. We have active pro-Israel people on campus. It's,
there's a difference between somebody who is Jewish and somebody who is pro-Israel, correct?
There is, and then we have Jewish pro-Palestinian people, and we also have, of course, pro-Israel people on campus who are dedicated to the society and culture of Israel. I think that the government has been trying to, they've been attacking civil society generally. They've been attacking colleges and universities. They've been attacking law firms. They've been attacking media outlets, as you well know. All of this is to chill speech. And I think it's very important over the next few months that Americans take back our democracy from this governmental overreach. And take the moment to just describe, we're doing this Democracy 2026 program and Democracy Summer this year, where we're encouraging colleges, universities across the country to have their students defend democracy by participating in it. And I think that the Trump administration has engaged in a kind of extortion against colleges and universities, trying to get them to make deals to satisfy the current regime. What I think we should be doing is getting citizens to understand how to participate in the electoral system between now and November. However they want to vote, Republican, Democrat, Independent, I don't care. It's not my business. We have now hundreds of colleges and universities that are incentivizing their students to participate in American democracy. It's the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. It's a great year for young people to say, I am going to be an active citizen in America. I'm not going to be a passive observer of governmental overreach.
Bilal.
Hard to top that. I mean, I think
how at the University of Hartford, how can you tell students to sort of like look ahead here? I know you're trying to moderate the conversation a lot of times, but he's talking about a democracy summer here. What are you thinking about here?
I mean, for me, that activity takes place in all of my classrooms. I mean, I teach political science. I do American politics as the broad sort of overfield. I teach about American national government. I teach about campaign elections and voting behavior. And any student who's taken a class with me knows that I talk about the importance of civic engagement, especially by young people. I often try to remind them that if you feel alienated in this political system, some of it is a product of the fact that young people are not as engaged as they need to be in order to make the case for why their interests and needs should not be peripheral but be a centerpiece of what happens in our government and decisions that are being made. Our students care a lot about things like the environment. Often I hear from them that they're the only generation who has, that has had to regularly do mass shooting, preparation, which is not anything I had to do as a student at that age. The exorbitant cost of higher education is just out of control. And President Roth, I really appreciate what Wesleyan is trying to do with making access and opportunity for students there. I imagine if I were coming out at this point and trying to go to college, it would be a tough decision because of the affordability issue. But I think ultimately to address those kinds of issues and those kinds of concerns, students need to become engaged. And the final point I'll make is that I've been involved with the work with Connecticut 250 as well, and especially with the emphasis on K through 12 and work with young people and trying to create materials to get them to focus on the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence.
Not just bayonets and bullets, correct?
Exactly, but with a vision of what kind of future do they want to create in America. And I think that's what's really important. And so anyone who's taking a class with me should walk away with that sense that I really care about my students, but I also say to them is that I won't be here 30 years from now probably, but you will be here, and you need to do the work of creating the kind of society that you want to live in.
Guys, we have less than 90 seconds left in the show, so I do want to address this part of it and do it quickly. There is the demographic cliff looming, which could mean that enrollment drops at colleges and universities in the coming years. You may be already dealing with this at Wesleyan. How long can some of these schools afford to alienate people of color if that's something they choose to do, or at least try to eschew some kind of effort where they're making their student body diverse?
Well, as I said before, most colleges and universities take most of the people who apply, and I think and it's going to be a tough road for many small schools in going forward. We have benefited in the United States from international students coming here to study. They've made a huge contribution, not only to the schools they're in, but to the country at large. I think that there'll be some consolidation in higher education. We're a small school. We have 15,000 applicants for only 800 spots. So what we're looking for is to make sure that we maintain and cultivate a diverse student body in the face of these demographic and political challenges.
And you got a minute left here. Can you protect those international students? We've heard from many international students, either they're talking through us through a pseudonym or they're not going on the record. What can you do to protect those? You're talking about democratic challenges or policy challenges, challenges that you have, yes.
Yeah, we want them to feel at home, right?
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons people come to America is because we're a welcoming country. We have been a hospitable place. And when our students come from China or India or Latin America or wherever Korea, Japan, when they come here, they feel they're at home. They're as much about being a Wesleyan as somebody who's come from Brooklyn or from Ohio. And that's a great feeling. And they get launched in the world with the feeling that they can do anything they want to do.
Such an important conversation we had with President Michael Roth at at Wesleyan University. Thank you so much for joining us this hour for the whole show.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Some good quality time together, President. I appreciate, of course, good quality time with my good buddy Bilal Sekou, Associate Professor at the University of Hartford. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me on.
Today's show was produced by Tale Ricketson. It was a great one. Edited by Patrick Scahill. Our technical producer is Dylan Reyes. Thank you so much to our interns for helping us out on the show. Happy birthday to Megan Boone for helping us out on the show. Thank you so much. Download the Wheelhouse anytime on your favorite podcast app. I'm Frankie Graziano. This is the Wheelhouse.